Welcome to the deep dive. We take complex research and pull out the key stuff, the ideas that really make you think.
That's the goal.
And you, the learner, you're here to get those insights quickly. Grab the aha moments without wading through endless jargon.
Right. And today we're looking at something pretty radical in AI reasoning.
Yeah, we are. We've got this research paper introducing absolute zero. It's a totally different way of thinking about how AI learns to reason.
It really challenges the basics. The big question they're asking is, can an AI learn to reason effectively, like really reason, without us feeding it examples, without human-labeled data?
Exactly. The idea is self-play. The AI model interacts with an environment, proposes its own problems, solves them, learns from feedback, all by itself.
It sounds intuitive maybe, but the results are the surprising part.
Totally mind-bending. This absolute zero reasoner, AZR they call it, actually hits state-of-the-art performance in tricky areas like math and coding.
Uh-huh.
And the kicker, it was trained on absolutely zero human-labeled data for those tasks. None.
That's the core innovation, the break from tradition. To really get why this is such a big deal, maybe we should quickly touch on how things were done before, the limitations.
Good idea. Let's unpack the old ways. The paper talks about supervised fine-tuning, SFT. That's the standard approach, right?
Yeah, pretty much. You feed the AI tons of examples of problem, the steps to solve it, the answer, all carefully created by human experts or maybe another smarter AI.
So the AI learns by copying these demonstrations?
Exactly. It's mimicry, essentially. But, the paper points out the scaling problem. What happens when you're at the cutting edge?
Where do the examples come from?
Right. If there's no better model to learn from, the human effort to create enough high-quality data just becomes, well, huge, a real bottleneck.
Okay, so that's SFT. Then there's RLVR reinforcement learning with verifiable rewards. That's a bit different.
A bit. Less direct handholding. You give the AI a task and you give it a way to check if the final answer is correct.
So the AI figures out the how itself, the reasoning steps.
It gets rewarded for getting the right answer. The environment tells it yes or no. But, and this is key, the tasks themselves, the questions it's trying to answer.
Still curated by humans.
Still curated by humans. So the AI learns its own path, but only within the playground we build for it. Its learning is still bound by the data we provide.
Okay, so absolute zero just throws that all out, no human data at all.
Pretty much. The core idea, the real innovation, is that the model learns to propose tasks, solve tasks, and learn from the process simultaneously, all through self-play in an environment.
Wow. Okay.
It's a closed loop, no human examples needed to get started or keep going.
So the AI is basically designing its own homework assignments. How does it actually work? How does it manage that?
Well, they call it the absolute zero loop. Think of it like this. There are two main parts, or roles, within the AI model. First, there's a proposer.
Okay.
The proposer suggests a task. Then this task goes to an environment like a code executor, which checks if it's a valid, solvable problem.
And transforms it into something testable.
Exactly, into a verifiable reasoning task, something with a clear right or wrong answer. And the proposer gets a reward based on whether that task seems useful for learning.
Right. So it's incentivized to ask good questions, basically. What's next in the loop?
Then the solver part of the model, and this is cool, can be the same underlying language model, tries to solve that task.
Ah, okay.
The environment checks the solver's answer, gives it a reward if it's correct. And both the proposer and the solver get trained together using these rewards.
And this cycle just repeats.
Constantly. Propose, validate, solve, reward, learn, all internal, no need for us to step in with labeled data.
That dual role, proposer and solver in one model, that's really interesting. Why are LLMs, large language models, particularly good for this?
It's because they work in this unified language space. They can naturally generate text that formulates a problem and text that solves a problem.
Okay, yeah.
So the researchers realized they could use one model, reward it for both proposing good, high-potential tasks and for solving them well. It becomes this self-contained engine for improvement.
How does it actually generate the tasks, though? Is it just random?
No, not quite random. It's guided. The proposer considers the type of task it's aiming for, like deduction or induction. We can get into those.
Okay.
And it looks at tasks it's generated successfully before, but it's nudged to propose something different to encourage diversity and exploration.
So it doesn't get stuck in a rut.
Exactly. Then the environment filters and refines these proposals, making sure they're solid, verifiable problems. And both proposing and solving are trained using reinforcement learning from those environment rewards.
You mentioned a competent reward earlier. What goes into that? Is it just about getting the answer right?
It's a bit more nuanced. Yes, the main reward is for proposing a useful task and solving it correctly, but there are also penalties.
Ah,
If the model makes a mistake, but its output is still formatted correctly so the environment can understand it, it gets a small penalty. But if it messes up the format entirely,
Like it produces gibberish the environment can't even parse.
Right. Then it gets a bigger penalty. So it learns not just to be right, but also to communicate effectively within the system's rules. That's crucial for the loop to work smoothly.
Makes sense. Okay, let's talk about those task types. The paper mentions deduction, induction, and abduction. How does AZR handle deduction?
Okay, deduction. The goal is, given a program and an input, predict the output.
Simple enough.
So the AZR proposer generates a program, say a little Python function and an input value. The environment runs it, gets the actual output. That gives you a program input-output set.
Got it. Then, for the solver, it gets the program and the output, and its job is to figure out the original input. Oh, interesting. It works backward.
Kind of. The environment checks the solver's predicted input by running it through the program. If the output matches the original output, the solver succeeded. It focuses on output equivalence, since sometimes different inputs might give the same output.
Okay, that covers deduction. Induction sounds harder, making a whole program just from input-output examples.
It definitely is a step up in complexity. For induction, the proposer actually starts by picking a program it generated successfully before, maybe from a deduction task.
Reusing its own work.
Yeah. Then it creates new input values and also a message, like a hint or description about what the program does. The environment runs the program with these new inputs to get the outputs.
Okay.
So now you have the original program, a set of these new input-output pairs, and the message. This whole bundle goes into an induction buffer. That message is pretty important, helps narrow down the possibilities.
And the solver's job.
The solver gets the message, but only half of the input-output pairs.
Only half. Why?
To make it generalize, it has to write a program that works correctly for the hidden pairs too. It can't just memorize the examples it sees or write super specific if statements. It has to capture the real underlying logic.
Clever. And the third type was abduction.
Right, abduction. This is similar to deduction, but flipped. You're given the program and the output, and you need to infer a likely input that would produce that output.
Okay.
So again, proposer makes a program input-output set via the environment. Then the solver gets the program and the output and has to predict the input. Verification is the same. Run the predicted input, check if the output matches.
The paper mentions this seed AZR0 triplet. What's that about? Is it important?
It's mostly to illustrate a point, I think. It's the absolute bare minimum needed to start the whole self-play loop.
Which is?
In their experiments, they literally started with just one super simple program, an identity function. Return X.
That's it.
That's it. It just shows how autonomous this thing is. You don't need a huge library of starting code. A capable base model could probably start from nothing, but this minimal seed shows you can bootstrap it easily if you want. No massive data set needed to get the ball rolling.
Okay, theory sounds cool, very innovative. But the results, did it actually work? The paper claims remarkable performance from zero data.
And they back it up. AZR hit state-of-the-art on standard reasoning benchmarks, not just averaged across math and coding, but specifically in coding too.
Better than models trained on actual coding data.
In one key case, yes. Their AZR Coder 7B model outperformed models that were trained on tens of thousands of expert-labeled coding problems.
Wow.
Which really suggests that core reasoning ability can emerge just from this self-play without needing to directly copy human solutions for that specific domain. That's a pretty big finding about how intelligence might develop.
That is stunning. They also say bigger bases yield bigger gains. What's the significance there?
That's really promising for the future of this approach. They saw performance consistently go up as they used larger base language models, 3 billion parameters, then 7, then 14 million for the coder models.
So the approach scales well.
It seems to. It suggests that as base LLMs get more powerful, absolute zero can leverage that increased capacity to achieve even better reasoning. The self-learning really takes advantage of the bigger models.
Another thing that jumped out was this emergent behavior. Comments as intermediate plans. What was happening there?
Yeah, that was fascinating. Specifically in the code induction tasks, the AZR models started putting comments in the code they generated.
Just on their own.
Spontaneously. And these comments looked a lot like step-by-step plans for how the code should work. It's very similar to techniques like React prompting, where you explicitly ask a model to think step by step.
Huh. So it kind of discovered that strategy itself?
Seems like it, and it's been seen in very large models doing formal math too. It suggests that having this kind of internal scratchpad, even just as code comments, is a really effective, maybe even natural way for AI to handle complex multi-step reasoning. It hints that similar internal monologue features might help in other areas too.
Interesting. Now, there was also a cautionary note, safety alarms ringing. What did they find there?
They did run into some cases, especially with one of the Llama 3.1 based models, where the reasoning chains AZR produced were concerning.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, they called it an uh-oh moment. It just highlights that as these systems become more autonomous, we absolutely need to build in safety checks and alignment research right alongside capability research. We need to steer them away from harmful reasoning paths.
Absolutely critical. Okay, let's dig into how AZR reasons. Did they see different patterns for different tasks?
They did. The model adapted its strategy. For deduction, finding the input, it often seemed to test possibilities. Try an input, see the output, adjust, try again, almost like trial and error until it matched.
Okay.
For deduction, finding the output, it was more like step-by-step execution. It would trace the code's logic, track variables like a person debugging until it got the final answer.
Makes sense.
And for induction writing the program, it was systematic. It would check its candidate program against all the input-output examples it was given, making sure it worked for every case.
So it's quite flexible in its approach.
Very. And that emergence of planning via comments during coding, that's a key finding, showing it develops structured ways to think.
They also did an experiment where they didn't train the proposer, only the solver. What happened then?
Performance dropped, not drastically, but noticeably.
So the proposer training does add value. It's not just about the solver.
It seems so. Training the proposer to actively find good, diverse problems seems to really help the overall learning. The researchers think it might relate to avoiding task interference, where learning one thing messes up another. It shows the two parts really work together. Optimizing the proposer looks like a good area for more work.
How does absolute zero compare to other self-play ideas in AI? What makes it stand out?
Well, self-play isn't totally new, but AZR has a couple of unique angles, according to the paper. First, they argue it's the first time self-play has really prompted these long, complex chains of thought for reasoning tasks.
Ah, the reasoning focus.
Right. And second, the way it frames everything as these specific Python abduction-adduction tasks grounded in a real working Python environment. That grounding is key.
Why is the grounding so important?
Because it means the rewards come directly from the environment. Did the code run correctly? Did it produce the right output? It's verifiable. Some other self-play might use learned reward models, which can be less reliable or even tricked. AZR uses ground truth feedback.
Okay, the tasks AZR proposes, you mentioned diversity is encouraged. How did they measure the complexity and diversity of what it was coming up with?
They used some standard software metrics for complexity, things like Complexify score and Halstead metrics, ways to gauge how intricate or cognitively demanding a piece of code is.
Right.
For diversity, they looked at the abstract syntax tree, the AST, which is like the code structural blueprint. They measured the edit distance between new programs and older ones. Bigger distance means more structural difference, hence more diversity. They also looked at the variety in the answers, the input-output pairs generated.
And did it actually get more complex and diverse over time?
Yes, and this was really interesting. It happened without an explicit reward for complexity or diversity.
Just from the basic reward of solving tasks?
Apparently so. The complexity scores and diversity metrics generally trended upwards during training. It suggests the simple reward setup was enough to push the model to explore harder, more varied problems naturally.
That's quite an emergent property.
It is. They also saw a neat dynamic. The proposer often increased the cognitive complexity in abducto-adduction, while the solver in induction tended to generate more efficient, simpler code. An interesting push and pull.
Did they try any other idea that didn't make the final cut?
Yeah, one they mentioned was an error deduction task. The proposer would try to create code that intentionally crashed with a specific error.
And the solver had to predict the error type.
Exactly. It didn't give a big performance boost in their tests and was computationally heavy, so they didn't pursue it fully. But they think it's still interesting
Why?
because error messages often contain useful clues about code. It could be another learning signal.
Makes sense. They also tried changing the starting point, right? Using leak code problems instead of that simple identity function.
They did. Seeding it with existing leak code problems gave an initial jump in coding performance.
But,
But it plateaued pretty quickly, ending up around the same level as the standard AZR. And interestingly, the math performance was actually worse when seeded with leak code.
huh, why would that be?
Their hypothesis is that the data generated by the model itself during self-play, the on-policy data, might actually be better for bootstrapping general reasoning, especially for something like math. The self-discovered learning path might be more valuable than starting with existing, potentially narrower human problems.
Fascinating. Okay, wrapping up, what are the big picture implications? Where does this research point for the future?
Well, the authors see tons of possibilities. Applying AZR to different environments is a big one, not just code, but maybe the web, formal math systems, physics simulations.
Even the real world. robots.
Potentially, yeah. Extending it to embodied AI, agentic tasks. Also exploring multimodal reasoning, maybe letting the model learn how to define the environment rules, designing better ways to encourage exploration and diversity.
So lots of research avenues.
Definitely. But the core implication, the big shift, is moving beyond the bottleneck of human-curated data, creating reasoning models that don't just solve problems we give them, but define their own learning curriculum. That's a major step towards more autonomous general AI.
So let's boil it down. The real breakthrough here is the absolute zero paradigm itself, an AI reaching top-tier reasoning performance, especially in coding and math, with literally zero human training examples for those tasks.
Exactly. That's the key takeaway.
It's a fundamental change, a huge academic innovation with massive potential implications for how AI develops.
Precisely. The focus is really on that innovative leap AI generating its own learning path through self-play in an environment. The potential for future work stemming from this is enormous.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? AI systems that can effectively teach themselves. It changes the game. The researchers call it the era of experience for AI reasoning.
A provocative thought to end on.
Indeed. And if you, our listener, want to get your hands dirty with this, the team actually open sourced their code, the models, the logs. It's all out there for you to explore. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.